Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Jared Moon here from Minute 3 Fitness, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. Today we have Brad Stulberg. Now, he is the author of Peak Performance, which is a really good book that I highly recommend you check out. We do talk about that book a little bit today, but another book that just came out of his is called The Passion Paradox. So you've all heard of, follow your passion and live an amazing life. Well, he says there is a paradox to that, and he talks about, the pitfalls of following your passion and how to kind of balance all of this. So really good information today, and I do recommend both books. They are really awesome. Peak Performance I read a while back. It's a great way to operate your daily life. And if you're ever thinking that you should follow your passion, or you currently are, you're going to find out that it's not all, leprechauns and rainbows. So definitely take some of this advice from Brad Stulberg. So without any further ado, let's listen to the interview. All right, Brad, welcome to the Better Humanology podcast, man. I'm super pumped to have you here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on the show. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited to get into it. To be honest, I finished your book not too long ago. Really thought it was phenomenal. And I know you have another book coming out. We could talk about that too. But man, I'm excited to hear about everything and some behind the scenes stuff. So, but before we do that, I want to hop into our challenges, man. How about a fitness challenge?
So fitness challenge, I'd say, is just to do something active every day outside of your time at the gym. And that can be taking the stairs at work. That can be intentionally parking a little bit farther away so you walk. Those are two really good examples that I like. Other examples could just be doing 40 push-ups before bed. I'm a big believer in hardwiring these patterns so that when you don't necessarily have access to a gym, or if you ever become injured, you still have some kind of movement in your life always.
Okay, yeah, I like that. I think that's a really good habit for anyone to throw into their daily routine. Do you have anything like that you do right now?
Yeah, so, I live in Oakland, California, so I very rarely commute by car. I'm pretty much walking everywhere that I go. And what I'll do is I'll just build in a little bit extra time in my day to do a 3-mile walk per se if I have to run an errand versus driving there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I get a little bit older, I'm trying to get away from just gym time. Not that I don't love gym time, but really create like a physical practice that I can carry with me day in and day out anywhere I am. So that's kind of at the root of this recommendation.
That's awesome. All right, man. How about a mental toughness challenge?
Meditate, ass on the chair, focus on the breath, 10 to 30 minutes. It's really hard if you don't do it. It's really hard if you do it. But I think that there's a lot that comes out of that.
Yeah, and are you a frequent meditator?
Yeah, I try to practice daily. I've got a young child at home. He's 10 months, so sleep can be in short supply, and that makes it tough to sit in the morning sometimes. But when things are clicking, yeah, I try to meditate regularly.
And do you just go to a quiet place? You use an app, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've got a little corner in my home office where I'll sit, and I use an app by a meditation teacher named Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's one of the founding fathers of the movement to bring meditation from the East to the West. And his app is older than some of these newer ones like Headspace and Calm, but I just find that he's a really good teacher, and that app works for me. Again, his name is Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, man, how about a book recommendation? It could be a book you've read recently or one that really impacted your life, anything.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. By an author named Robert M. Perseg, who sadly passed away a few years ago. But book came out in 1974 and didn't really sell very well. And then a few years later, it became this cult classic. And the book is on so many things at the same time, but it's really about what happens when you care deeply for something and how that thing can make your life wonderful or totally blow up your life, and sometimes do both at the same time.
And can I get the title one more time?
Yeah, sure. It's called Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. the book's not about motorcycles.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Just writing it down and adding it to the list. I do appreciate that. All right, man. Well, how about we get into who you are? Tell us a little bit about your background. Go as far back as you'd like, and then catch us up to today, your current projects and what you're most passionate about.
Yeah, so I grew up an athlete. I played team sports in high school. Pretty decent football player, like all-city honorable mention, that kind of thing. Not great, but not terrible. And when I went to college, I went to the University of Michigan, and there I kind of shifted from a power-based strength athlete to an endurance athlete. And I spent about 8 years, 9 years, 10 years even, trying to get pretty fast at the marathon distance and then long distance triathlons. And then just recently, actually, I decided to go back to my roots. So for the past year, my fitness routine has been in the gym. That's all just hobby. I wish I could do that stuff professionally, but I don't. So what I do professionally is I write and I coach on human performance. My coaching practice includes athletes as well as executives and entrepreneurs. And then my writing explores a lot of the topics that I work with these individuals on. And just to be clear, it's not physiological coaching. So it's not like I'm programming exercise for these people, but more so on the mental side of the game.
Yeah, like having a business coach or high performance coach, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm no stranger to those types of coaches in my life right now, so I think that's awesome. All right, man. Well, tell me a little bit about how this all started. Going back to, how do you become a, peak performance coach?
Yeah, I've had a circuitous path to this. So I started my career as a consultant for the consulting firm McKinsey and Company, and I was focused in their healthcare practice. And at the time, that wasn't really individual health and well-being, but much more trying to change the system to make the healthcare system better. But on those projects, I was always the person doing the writing. And whether that meant writing white papers or memos, or even the person making the PowerPoint slides. So it was actually, in hindsight, looking back, it's easy to see that that was the perfect training to be a nonfiction writer. Because every single McKinsey project is like, there's this problem you're trying to solve. You talk to a bunch of experts, you do a bunch of research, you tell a story. If you're good, you say, here's how I might be wrong. And then you leave the client with some recommendations on what to do next. And that's exactly what a good nonfiction book, that's a very similar flow. So I always liked the writing. I was always good at the writing. I was never the dude in the financial model. And then I went to graduate school to study public health. And it was there that my interest in triathlon really blossomed. And at the same time, my interest in individual performance and well-being. So not from a system standpoint, but from an individual standpoint. And during graduate school, I started writing more and more. It started off as just a blog, a labor of love. And a few of those blog posts did well and led to other opportunities. And probably thousands, maybe not thousands, but at least 1,000 articles later, I found myself writing for some better known publications, mainly outside in New York Magazine. And that led to a book deal. And then I wrote a book. And after I wrote the book, people reached out to me and they said, hey, you seem to be at least somewhat knowledgeable on these kind of challenging, thorny topics. Do you have any interest in coaching? And at the time, I had done very little coaching. All the coaching I'd done had just been for friends, so it wasn't really even coaching. It was giving them advice. But I talked to a few professional coaches about how that works and what's it like to have a practice. And then about 3 years ago, I started a coaching practice. And now I spend my time as a mix of coaching and writing. That's
awesome, man.
Yeah, it's neat. I like the coaching because I have skin in the game. So I'm not just writing from the ivory tower. The flip side is that my writing informs my coaching. So there's a pretty good harmonious relationship between the two. It's also funny that when I'm in the midst of a busy coaching week, I'm like, oh crap, I wish I could just write. And when I'm in the midst of a busy writing week on a deadline, I'm like, oh crap, I wish I could just talk to people about this. So it ends up working out.
Yeah, I was just talking to my wife about this today, how, because I'm an entrepreneur in the, fitness space, and you've probably heard that quote before of, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life or whatever. And I don't fully believe that. There's a lot of like sometimes things that you have to do are work, even if you're passionate about it. But I do know one thing about my time that's been different ever since I've, started doing this stuff is I always feel like I've never like looked at the clock and I'm like, man, it's only 9 a.m. Like, this day's going by so slow. It's always like, oh, wow, that was fast. Like, I have so much more I could do. I guess I'll have to do it tomorrow. And so I think that there's a big breakdown. And I'm sure that you found that recently moving kind of, in your own career and doing this coaching and all that.
Yeah, there is. There's always more that you could do. I think it's a mix of enjoying what you do and then also having the buck stop at you. So of course there's always more you could do. And it's really challenging for entrepreneurs, for myself, sounds like for you, and for just about everyone that I've worked with to be able to pull back in a wise way. Particularly because like that day when there's more that you can do, doing more is better. It makes sense. But over the course of a year or a decade or a career, that stuff catches up to you, and the long-term result is not a good one. Yeah,
and that's that's what I thought was great about your book, Peak Performance. So the equation there is stress plus rest equals growth, right?
That is.
Yeah, and so I feel like in the entrepreneur space, athletic space, really any high achiever space, this could be true of elite performers in the military, just there's a lot more stress part of it and a lot less of the rest part of it. So can you talk about that? And I don't know, maybe where you think that came from and how rest kind of got cut out of the equation for a lot of people.
So the basic equation, stress plus rest equals growth, I'm sure the vast majority of listeners, that'll sound familiar because that's how you train your body. So in exercise science, it's often called progressive overload or periodization. And it's this notion that the way that you make a muscle, like your biceps muscle, or even a system, so your cardiovascular system, the way that you make it stronger is you have to challenge the system, you have to stress it, and then you let it rest and recover. And it's during the rest and recovery phase that the muscle or the system gets bigger in the case of a muscle, or more efficient in the case of a physiological system. So anyone that's overtrained knows what happens when you stress the system too much without enough rest. You get injured, you lose motivation, you get sick. Anyone that has undertrained and gotten into a rut knows what happens when you don't gradually increase the stress. It's just complacency. You don't grow. So the key to making your body stronger is to stress it at the right dose, follow that stress with the right amount of rest and recovery, and then repeat the cycle over and over and over again, gradually upping the stress each time. What's interesting is that same cycle holds true far outside of the gym. So our minds grow in a very similar way. If we stress or challenge ourselves intellectually and we never rest, we cut short on sleep, we don't do other tasks other than the thing that we're challenging ourselves with, eventually you get diminishing marginal returns, and then you get negative returns. So you become overtired, you start making mistakes, your problem-solving ability goes down, your willpower goes down. The flip side is also obviously true. If you're never challenging yourself intellectually, you kind of get into a rut and you don't grow at all. If anything, you maybe stagnate. And this even holds true to how organizations work. If organizations don't stress themselves, they turn into Blockbuster Video or AOL, right? The environment changes. They're not challenging themselves to change with it. They get selected out. Whereas an organization like Disney or the San Antonio Spurs, those organizations are constantly pushing the envelope of what they do, and that's what allows them to grow and thrive. So in the case of Disney, right, they went from an amusement park to being a production company. Pixar is like their leading revenue source now. San Antonio Spurs, when the NBA started changing to more of a perimeter game, they pioneered recruiting European players. So it's really neat how this thing that works on such an acute level, such as your biceps muscle, can be applied so broadly. So that's the growth equation in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I find this really fascinating because when I was reading the book, I may have stumbled upon this out of just complete need. What happened to me was, I've been an entrepreneur for a while, and burnout's pretty easy, especially early on. And so what we do in our training, all the athletes that train under us, we go really hard for 3 weeks, and then we back off. We do a deload week, so we cut volume, reps, sets, all that stuff.
There you go, right? Stress plus rest equals growth. Exactly.
Yeah, and so that's what we've been doing in our physical programming. And it was about 6 months ago, I decided to try that to my work life. I was like, because I do the same training that our athletes do. I'm like, okay, the third week, or the fourth week really, when it's that deload week physically, I'm going to deload my calendar, my work calendar. So I still work that fourth week, but I don't do any podcast interviews. I don't take any calls. I don't, I do really just try and focus in the areas that I enjoy really working and not. Now, I'd love to get your opinion on it. You think that's a little too aggressive, or would you recommend that that's kind of what people should do in there to kind of maintain a work-life balance if they have that kind of freedom and flexibility? What's your recommendation there?
Well, I'd love to hear how that's working for you. To do the three on, one off. And I guess before that, well, actually, no, yeah, let me hear what you have to say first, because I'm curious, because I've never heard of someone do it in that type of cadence.
It's been working out really great for me, because I think the things that do put stress on me or are pretty much time commitment based things, like doing an interview, a podcast interview, or having calls with athletes or nutrition calls or whatever it is, because I could find myself more stressed out if I had to do X, Y, and Z in the morning, and then I had a bunch of calls in the afternoon. And if I didn't get X, Y, and Z done, then I become more stressed when I'm on the call.
Yeah,
because that
you're
stuff,
thinking about it. Yeah,
right. And so, and I've found a pretty good system to my day to day. But that's the reason that was the original reason I decided to do it. And I don't know, it's been really, I'm still doing it. It's been really great because I just block off that fourth week in my calendar and then really just focus on, like I said, tasks that I want to do or need to get done, as opposed to just feeling like I'm run by my calendar.
Yeah, well, I'm honored to hear that. So I'm smiling ear to ear here across the country, because that's wonderful. And I'm glad that that's worked out for you and made a positive impact. I think if you have the flexibility and the freedom to do something like that, I think it makes total sense. Exactly what Jared's describing is a beautiful way to vacillate between stress and rest. The 3 week, 1 week, I don't think that there's an exact prescription. My hunch is that if you didn't go so hard during the 3 weeks, maybe it would be every 7 weeks you take a deload week. Or if you went really hard for 2 weeks, maybe it would be 2 weeks on, 1 week off. And that's going to change over the course of a year. It's going to change over the course of a lifetime. So I think that it's really at the individual level about figuring out, well, when I go hard, what does that mean? And how hard am I going to go? When I go easy, what does that mean? And how easy am I going to go? Now, this works out really well if you're an entrepreneur, because you have a fair amount of control over your schedule. If you're working in a larger organization, you don't necessarily have that flexibility and freedom, but I think that people have more freedom than they imagined. So a lot of clients that I work with that don't have that freedom, we talk about what are their big milestones at work over the course of a year, and how can they sync up their vacation time to follow those milestones. And that works out really well for people. And it doesn't have to be a 2 week trip to Hawaii. It can just be a long weekend where you're totally checked out. The other thing that is interesting that I've worked with people to try to reclaim is the weekend. So the Western culture was initially set up to have this notion of stress plus rest equals growth. The week would be stress, and the weekend in most Judeo-Christian Western religions is Sabbath, which is a day of rest, and then you stress the system again. Over the last century, that day of rest has incrementally become a half day of rest, a few hours of rest.
Right.
For some people, no rest at all. So I think that's contributing to this burnout epidemic that's going on right now. Yeah,
and that's why, to be honest, that's why I was so relieved when I read your book, because I've always kind of felt like, and part of the reason you probably wrote the book is just there's this this grind mentality, right? That you shouldn't take any time off and that you should just be going as hard as you can all the time, but it's just not sustainable. I mean, it's
right. And that's the thing. And that's what makes it so hard to change, is that if you decide to change, you're going to get worse before you get better. Because the day that you decide, like, I'm going to log off at 5 p.m., or the week that you decide I'm not going to do any work on Saturday, you are going to get less done that week. So you're going to perform worse in that moment But over the course of a couple months or a year, and certainly a career, you're going to perform so much better. So it's like if you think of yourself as an individual, as like a for-profit company, you can chase quarterly earnings and keep on grasping, but that's not a good long-term growth strategy. Or you can be really deliberate and kind of grow more slowly, but therefore grow more sustainably over time. And you see this in athletes all the time. I mean, there's so many stories of athletes that train really, really hard and completely crush for a few years and then have very short careers because they totally burn themselves out, versus an athlete that is still performing at a really high level, say into their 40s, because they've been very tactical about their training.
Now, I'd love to kind of go back because we definitely, like, I think it's pretty clear what stress is. And you mentioned a few things from vacation and weekends. Just, do you have any other tips, strategies for anyone out there, like on the rest side of things? Like maybe they have, pretty intense work schedules or whatever that they're not in control of. Like, what do you recommend, if anything else? I know, like I said, you already mentioned a few things. If anything else, to make sure that they're getting adequate rest recovery time frame in their life.
So I'm glad that you asked this question, because the concept is one thing, but then the actual implementation and practice is another. So on a day-to-day level, I'm a big fan of thinking of your work like interval training. So 45 minutes to an hour and a half on, and then short little breaks. And those short little breaks can be walking to fill up your water bottle and going to the bathroom. So it can just be a 2-minute break. Maybe it's a 5-minute break. Maybe you're running an errand in the afternoon for 20 minutes to separate 2-hour periods of work. But just the ability to turn off your brain, step away from what you're doing for a few minutes, allows your mind to recover in an enormous way. There's really interesting research that shows that the best thing that you can do if you've been trying to solve a problem with your brain and you're stuck is to step away and go for a short walk and come back. You're like 40% more likely to solve it than if you just sat at your computer, which again is kind of like counterintuitive, because when you're working on something, you get sucked in and you're like, oh, I'm stuck. I got to try harder. But the best thing that you can do is walk away. That's why so many people report having great ideas in the shower or when they're on walks, when they're not doing the thing that they're stuck on. So day to day, again, trying to work in spurts of good, intense effort followed by mini rest. So think of it like interval training. And then on a broader scale, I think the most important thing is what bridges our days, which is sleep. So both the mind and body grow when you sleep, not during the day. All the information that you're exposing yourself to, all that stuff gets processed, filtered, and connected when you sleep. So many people are sacrificing sleep to get more done. But I've come to think about sleep as one of the most productive things someone can do. And it's not separate from the work. It's a part of a work, right? It's like any athlete that doesn't recover isn't going to get stronger. And our brains work very much the same way. And then over a longer time horizon, that's where things like vacations come into play, or other opportunities to deliberately step away from what you're doing and switch to some sort of other task.
I've actually heard.
So it's kind of like there's again, very similar to physical training. There's a daily cycle of these micro breaks. Then you bridge days with sleep. Then ideally you're taking a day off on the weekend, and then over the course of a year, it's like you're peaking a few times, and then after those peak periods, you're deloading a bit.
I love that. I absolutely love it, because the more I can think about my work week in terms of something I've already studied a lot and understand and do on a daily basis, I can put my life into training, physical training terms that helps me understand and process it a lot better. I think perhaps people with some sort of fitness ground have an unfair advantage in that regard, but I think it's great to get this information out to anyone who doesn't know about periodization and resting and recovering and things like that. It's so cool that it applies all the way down to that tactical daily, hourly level.
Yeah, one of my favorite studies in the book is the study out of Stanford where it was called Give Your Ideas Legs. And they did basically what I explained. They had study participants sit at a computer trying to solve really hard problems. And the control group during a break was told to just sit still. And the experimental group went on a 5-minute walk. And the experimental group solved the problems 40% more than the control group. So it's really, really neat to see how just a task switch, going from using your brain to just taking a walk and mind wandering, can result in such a better ability to solve problems. So I'm a huge fan of micro breaks. And then the science on sleep is just so clear that everything gets better when you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of sleep researchers lately and interviewed more than a few for the podcast now. And one quote that sticks out to me is something along the lines of, sleep is what did he say? It was sleep is the greatest performance enhancer that we have that's legal, that's still legal.
I totally buy it. Yeah. I think on Twitter, I've tweeted something very similar, and it's like every once in a while I see people spending so much money on compression boots and thermal regulation tanks and all kinds of stuff, magnetic bracelets and supplements. And I want to ask all these people, like, are you sleeping at least 8 hours a night? And if you're not, like, save all the money and energy and sleep, because it's so freaking powerful. If you think about it physiologically, the number one thing that's happening in your sleep for your body is human growth hormone, and testosterone is being released. So you're literally doing what people do illegally to get stronger. You sleep. So the fountain of youth isn't some supplement, it's sleep. And I'm totally in alignment with that researcher that you quoted.
Yeah, I think, and to be honest, I've heard it from athletes who've been to the CrossFit Games before too. They mentioned they've tried every supplement and recovery method out there, but nothing beats, after their decade of experience, nothing really beats the sleep and nutrition combination. They said that there's nothing else that they've ever felt better recovered or more prepared for training than just making sure those two things are as dialed in as possible. And I really think supplementation is like a 1% or less game. If you want to take some pills or whatever, I don't think that the benefits really going to be like this, 30% jump
right.
in productivity.
I think that's the thing. Yeah, the way that I like to think about it is that stuff is like the penthouse, but
right.
you can't build a penthouse until you have a foundation.
Right.
And the foundation is exactly what you said. It's good sleep habits, good nutrition. And then the other thing that I'd add to that is community. I just think it's really important to have the support of others, whether you're challenging yourself physically or you're challenging yourself mentally. It goes a long way to be a part of a community. I
completely agree. All right, man. Are you open to talking about your new book?
Yeah, totally. I'm really excited for it to come out.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about it. It's called The Passion Paradox. Is that correct?
Correct. So the new book started with this idea that we're always told to find and follow our passion. But no one really gives you advice on how to do that. And it's not just like lightning strikes and people magically find what they're passionate about and life is happily ever after. It doesn't work like that. So how does one go about finding a passion? And then if you do have a passion, the story that we're told is that, wow, it's awesome, you should follow your passion. But following your passion can be really hard, because the more that you care about something, the more you start doing that thing to the exclusion of everything else. And sometimes your identity gets so tied up in that thing that what was once this joyful, life-giving passion actually becomes a destructive force in your life. So the book deconstructs this notion that passion is this wonderful thing that everyone should just find and follow, and treats it as a little bit more of a complex topic. That's
very, very interesting, because I think, so I'm very passionate about fitness. But I competed a lot in fitness and, let's say, just training and sports and everything, in high school and college. But what I could tell that was happening to me, these things I'm super passionate about, kind of breaking down, because like you're saying, you're just doing so much of it and everything's being analyzed so much. And it really does start to break down. And that's when I left all that behind and got out of college, I started to baby my passion a little bit more. I'm like, I really need to just do it for me and not for anyone else or any competitive environment.
That's such a wise thing that you came to, is just that. So there's what we learned in researching the book is that there's this split between two different kinds of passion. And one passion is called harmonious passion. And this is when you're passionate about the thing that you're doing itself. So you love fitness because you love training. You love how it makes you feel. You love pushing yourself. You love the community. Then there's this other side of passion that's called obsessive passion. And that's when you start to become more in love with the external results and the validation that fitness is bringing you than fitness itself. So that's when you're training so that you can win the CrossFit Games, or you're training so that you can snap the Instagram photo or to impress your friends. That kind of passion often blows up in people. And that can lead to all kinds of issues, from anxiety to depression to burnout. Now that sounds simple, but it's a really slippery slope, because what happens with most people is you start out doing something because you're passionate about the thing, but then you start performing well, and suddenly you're having all this external validation, and it's really hard not to get swept up in all that and let that take over. So a big part of the book is addressing the skills to really stay focused on the process and the thing that you love itself, and not to let too much of that external stuff get in the way.
I think that's huge. And one question I have for you, having done all the research for the book and written it, do you think that everyone has a passion?
So I think that everyone can cultivate a passion, and that's a sacred cow that I slay in the book. So this notion that you find your passion is total bullshit. Very, very rarely does someone just stumble into something and immediately love it. Passion actually is developed and cultivated over time. So much better than thinking about, I need to find a passion, is actually to follow the things that interest you and invest time in what interests you, and follow those interests. And then eventually they'll blossom into passions if it's the right fit for you. And this sounds kind of trivial, but I actually think it's real important, because again, the cultural wisdom says find your passion. So if the bar is that high and you try something and you don't immediately love it, you're like, oh, this must not be my passion, so I'm going to move on to the next thing. Whereas if you follow something and you're like, this is pretty interesting. I wouldn't expect to be passionate about something after a week, after a month, even after a year. I wasn't passionate about writing after a year. Writing's really hard. But it's just this process of continually cultivating an interest that can lead to passion.
And so tell me where this book came from, jumping from peak performance to passion paradox.
So I wrote the book, I guess, for two reasons. The first is that all the world-class performers that I interviewed for peak performance, they were all super passionate, but they didn't talk about passion as just being this positive force. They talked about having a very complicated relationship with their passion. They talked about marriages having struggles. They talked about wishing that they were a better parent. They talked about retirement being so challenging. And that's when I started thinking that, wow, really caring about something is both a blessing, but it can also be a curse. It's really hard to be passionate and to care deeply about something. And then I started looking at myself, and in my emerging passion as a writer. And I started thinking, wow, there are times when I should be present for my wife, and I'm not, because I'm thinking about the 5th paragraph of the story that I'm editing. Or there are times when I should be able to turn off and practice what I preach and go on a hike. But even if I don't bring the device with me, my mind is still chewing over these ideas. And on the one hand, you could say how fortunate I am to have a career that I love. On the other hand, I could say, wow, I'm not enjoying nature and I'm not present with my wife. So I wanted to try to get ahead of some of the destructive forces and try to figure out how I could better practice passion in a way that I could learn how to choose when to really be all in, but also step out and be present for other things. And it's an ongoing practice. That's a huge theme in the book, is that passion isn't this one-time thing. It's a practice that you have to keep on coming back to, keep on nourishing, keep on nurturing. Otherwise, the inertia of it can just completely take over your life. By the time you realize what happened, it's too late.
I guess marriage would just be you mentioned that, but just a good metaphor for passion in general. That marriage isn't always perfect. You guys will get people get in disagreements, and there are good times, bad times, and it takes a lot of work to forge a good relationship, and you have to be on point with that. Would you say that's a fair statement, that that's how any passion is going to be, whatever you're cultivating and whatever that might be?
Yeah, you're a super smart dude. So in the beginning of the book, I introduced passion by going back to the roots of the word. And before, passion meant following an activity that you love. It was completely used in the romantic sense. And then what's even more interesting is that the research on love shows that love very rarely happens at the first sight. And it's actually a huge problem in the millennial generation right now. Researchers find that people expect love at the first sight, and if things aren't perfect right away, they move on, and people aren't finding love. If you have what's called a growth mindset towards love, and you believe that love is something to be cultivated over time, you're much likely to find yourself in a long-term relationship and have greater life satisfaction. So the research on love completely mirrors the research on passion. So you are spot on. And again, it makes total sense, right? Like, these things that you really care about, they're complicated. And if you don't come back to them over and over again and make them a practice, an ongoing practice, then they can very easily spiral out of control.
I think that's great, man. I think it sounds like an awesome book, and I cannot wait to read it. So when does that come out?
That comes out March 19th. And the website for the book is thepassionparadoxbook.net. And my co-author and I are running all kinds of pre-order giveaways on that. So there's some really cool stuff that we've got up there if you're interested in and want to pre-order the book.
Awesome. And I know I definitely will. Well, Brad, let's get to the quickfire questions of the show. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it. I don't know how quick I'll be, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, no need for any speed, but we'll just hear what the answers are. What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
The hardest workout I've ever done. I've run a 20 by 400. So 20 reps of 400 meters. Wow. Hard on like a minute rest. And that took me to the well. I remember like curling up in the fetal position after that workout for a day.
That's pretty brutal, man. Is that back in the marathon training days?
Yeah, that was in the marathon training days. And that just whips like every possible system.
Yeah, that's intense. All right. In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
I want to say meditation. I think that meditation, not necessarily practice like to enter this deep relaxation state, but more so to be able to watch your thoughts and feel your feelings without getting engaged in them is a really useful skill that can penetrate just about every corner of life for the better. It's certainly been my experience.
And how long would you say that takes?
Oh, it's forever. I mean, I'm not there yet. Like, there's no arriving.
But I want to like.
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
Just like the start of it, I guess, where you finally like, months. Oh wow,
6 months for me.
Okay, awesome.
But it was just really trusting and believing in the process, and wise people that told me just be patient before I started to realize it. So the first 6 months, it was just kind of a slog.
Okay, awesome. Good to know. All right, if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Kettlebell.
You say kettlebell?
Yeah, I didn't have to think long about that.
Awesome. All right, man. Now,
goblet squats, swings. I mean, you can hurt yourself with a kettlebell in a good way.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do with that bad boy. All right, man. Now, the last question of the show, or the biggest question of the show, what's the best advice you have for becoming a better human? And this is 100% open-ended.
Be vulnerable. If you catch yourself acting or feeling like you're performing or holding back, really question that assumption that that's the best thing to do. Surround yourself wisely. So I just think that the value of community is so important. Not just virtual community, but real, like, in-person community. Humans are a social species, and I think that we're at a moment right now where lots of people feel like they're more connected than ever, but they don't necessarily feel like they're part of a tight-knit local community. So investing in local community is also really important. And then the third thing I'd say is just be compassionate towards yourself. Like, it's hard to be a human. Change is hard. Improvement is hard. I probably shoot 60% on the things that I write about. So by no means am I perfect. I don't think anyone is. And if you fail in these efforts to get better, the less that you judge yourself, the better off you'll be. So I guess to sum it up, it would be community, self-compassion, and vulnerability.
I love it. And I think that's great. I have nothing more to add, man. So what's the best place for people to learn more about you, what you're doing, books, all that good stuff?
So I try to be pretty responsive on Twitter, where I'm at B Stulberg. My website is www.bradstulberg.com, and that's where I've got information on my coaching practice, as well as information on my books and my columns with Outside Magazine. And then the book website is www.passionparadoxbook.net. Yeah, that's it. I try to be responsive. So I love talking about this kind of stuff.
All right, awesome. And we will link to all of those things in the show notes for anyone listening. Well, Brad, it's been a blast having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. I really enjoyed it. Great conversation, and keep doing the work that you do. It's great.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.